Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be talking about the books that I read in September. I do want to start off by talking a little bit about my stats, what I've been reading and haven't been reading. And so I did read a total of 8 books last month. Out of those 8 books, 3 of them were 3.5 stars for me out of 5. 4 of them were 4 stars for me, 4 out of 5 stars, and I had a 1 5-star book. In terms of genres, I read 3 sci-fi books. One of those sci-fi books was also a YA sci-fi book. I read 3 novellas. Out of the 8 books, 3 of them were translated works. 3 of them were audiobooks. 1 was a contemporary and 1 was a memoir. This book that I picked up in the month of September was The Vegetarian by Kang. This is a novella and it's one of the translated works that I read this month. To be honest, when I was first done reading it, I was like, what did I just read? It was also one of the audiobooks that I listened to. After I finished the audiobook, I went ahead and bought a physical copy and I'm going to reread it because, being completely honest, it confused the shit out of me. I was like, what did I just read? I was 100% sure that I was 90% confused by the end of it. But if you don't know what this is about, this follows our main character who lives in modern day Seoul, Korea. Her name is Nndei, and she decides to become a vegetarian after having sinister dreams of animal cruelty and torture. And from there we kind of follow her after becoming a vegetarian, and she in a sort of way has this desire to become more plant-like, and we basically get to see the impacts, the devastating impacts it has on her personal life and on her family life. This is told from the point of view of her husband, her sister, and her sister's husband. We get little brief moments where we get to hear her thoughts, but she's never ever really given a voice in the book at all, which I think kind of is part of the overall social commentary that is trying to be made. This book deals a lot with the choices we make and the violence that is inherent in those choices, and basically the impossibility of innocence because of all those choices. So if you think this is a book about becoming a vegetarian or how to become a vegetarian, or no, no, it's not. It's not a book about vegetarianism. And what I found really interesting about this book is that I think that different people from different cultural backgrounds will find something or will get something different out of this book, just because it talks about so much that you will focus and hone in on certain parts. Some people will think about it's about vegetarianism, other people will think about its social commentary on patriarchy, other people will think it's about femicide, other people will think it's about eating disorders. It just touches on so many topics and it's disturbing. And honestly, Nndei's husband pisses me off. It's a really confusing book. If you I feel like I have a thing for confusing books, but this book did win the 2016 International Man Booker Prize, so I think it has some merit. I gave it a 4 out of 5 and I will definitely be rereading it. That I finished in the month of September is the book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Enriquez. This book follows the story of a Mexican family who immigrated to the United States after their daughter Maribel suffers a tragedy and she ends up having some learning disabilities. They're hoping to enroll her in a school here in the United States to help with her learning and hopefully with the healing of her injury. I thought this was a great story, a great book. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The writing is very simple. It has very short chapters. So if you like that, very short chapters that are very easy to read, I think you'll enjoy this one. It's really immersive and it's a fast read. The book overall, I think it's about 200 pages. I like how inclusive the book was. It it's a book written from multiple points of views. It follows different Latin American families that have immigrated here to the United States. Contrary to popular belief, not all immigrants are Mexican. Some of them come from other Latin American countries. And I like how this book weaved their stories into the entire narrative and really talks about how people that are immigrating here have really complex and difficult stories to tell. The reason that I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 is because I was left wanting a little bit more. There is a romance between Maribel and a Panamanian boy, and I wish that was fleshed out a little more. I'm usually not a romance reader, but I feel like that innocent love between them could have given the story a little bit more. And I wish the side characters would have been involved a little bit more because their stories were so unique and so intriguing that I wish I had a little bit more about them. But the next book that I read in the month of September is called Binti by Nndei. I don't know how to pronounce this author's name, so I'm going to put it on the screen instead. But I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This was a sci-fi / speculative fiction novella, and we follow our main character Binti. She's from the Himba people, and she is the first of her kind to be accepted into the UMSA University, which is a prestigious intergalactic university that only accepts 5% of humans into their university. And the Himba people have never had anyone from their tribe attend this university. The Himba people are very smart, mathematically based people who love their land so much so that they never leave. And in the story, we follow our protagonist Binti on her journey from Earth to the university. On that journey, she encounters the Meduse people when they slaughter everybody on board the ship, and she has to find a way to survive. I found this book to be extremely creative, super unique. I loved the main character Binti. She was believable, she was smart, she was capable, but she was also flawed. This was her first time away from home. And she didn't know the Meduse, and so you can definitely see the flaws in her character, which I genuinely really enjoyed because she was a believable character. So I really enjoyed that. The only reason I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars is because this is the first book in a series, and it truly felt like it was just laying the groundwork for the rest of the series. Super mathematically based, but easy to digest and understand. I can't wait to finish the rest of the series. Overall, I think it's a really good start, and I'm definitely interested in continuing. The next book that I read in the month of September was the only memoir that I read, and this actually was the audiobook that I listened to, and this is Ordinary Girls by Jaquira Diaz. I gave this book a 4 out of 5. I do rate my memoirs your enjoyment and from what I learned and what I received as a reader from the book. I'm not trying to judge or rate the experience of someone's life, but I think it's important to rate nonfiction as well. And that's just no choice. The only reason I didn't give this book a 5 out of 5 stars is because it does have some time jumps as she's narrating her life, and those can be a little bit confusing, especially in an audiobook form. I feel like if I would have physically read it, I would have definitely given it a 5 out of 5 because I can take my time reading and I can, go back and read the page before. I feel like in an audiobook, I just really have to concentrate sometimes because if not, I won't really focus. And so that was the only thing that I found wrong with this book. Jaquira talks about growing up in housing projects in Miami Beach and also when she lived in Puerto Rico with her father. She talks about being caught in extremes, about finding violence in places where love should be. It talks about her mom's schizophrenia and the poverty and the violence that she experienced when growing up. And ultimately, I think this is a written memoir of everyday girls who are forced to grow up before they ever learn to be girls. they're forced to grow up and be adults and never really get to enjoy life as girls. Yeah, it was deeply moving, beautifully written. It's provocative, and it honestly hit home for me because I don't know if you know this about me, but I am Mexican American, and so I think it really gives a voice to people who are kind of caught in the in-between, who ethnically and culturally identify as Puerto Rican or Mexican or Nicaraguense, but we're American, you know, and it kind of gives a new definition to what being American is, and it gives voice and power to communities that are often marginalized in mainstream society. So I absolutely loved this book. And again, the only reason it wasn't a 5 out of 5 for me is because of the time jumps. I do want to say that there is Spanish in the book, and so if you don't know Spanish, I would highly recommend you pick up the physical book and then Google the Spanish terms instead of listening to it, because even though Spanish is my first language and I had trouble understanding some of the words because there's a lot of phrases that Puerto Rican say in Spanish that Mexican Spanish doesn't use, if that makes sense. So I recommend you actually picking this up in a physical form. The next book that I read in the month of September is A Pale View of Hills by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was his debut novel, and I loved it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. In this book, we follow the story of Etsuko. She is a Japanese living alone in England, and she's dwelling on the death of one of her daughters who committed suicide. During the book, we follow that timeline, and then we follow an alternating timeline when Etsuko was living in Nagasaki, Japan. And that summer, they're telling the story of Japanese people rebuilding their lives after World War II and after the bombing of Nagasaki. It's a very short book, about 200 pages. It's a very slow build, subtle book, and I absolutely adored it for a debut novel back then. It's fantastic. I thought it was great. Ishiguro builds this kind of like airy, a little bit haunting kind of atmosphere in the back, and I think it was beautifully crafted and delicately written. I think this book really touches on the impact of suppressed memories and how history can inform the present. So if that sounds like something that sounds interesting to you, I think this is a great one by Ishiguro, and it's one that's not as popular as Never Let Me Go or The Remains of the Day, but I think it's definitely worth picking up if you love those two. The next book that I read this month is my 5-star pick, and I gave it 5 out of 5, and it's Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. If you haven't, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this book because I gave it its own review. I'll put it up in the cards. I don't know how to put videos in the cards. I'll try to figure it out, so it might be in the cards. If not, I will go ahead and leave a link in the description box to it. I thought it was great. It's fantastic. It's a speculative fiction sci-fi book. I think Jeff Vandermeer likes to classify himself as this like weird genre or like a subgenre of sci-fi called like weird genre. A brief synopsis for the book is we follow 4 female scientists who go into Area X to observe and map out the place and avoid being contaminated. We find out that Area X is this remote area on the coastline that is having strange activity. There's a border, and we have the Southern Reach, which is this government program who is trying to figure out what is going on. I loved every second of it. I implore you to pick it up if it sounds even remotely interesting to you. For the next 2 books, I'm actually going to bring in Ben. This is my partner. We both read the next 2 books together, so I just thought it'd be kind of cool to get both of our thoughts. So the next book that we both finished in the month of September is More Than This by Patrick Ness. What did you rate it?
I think I gave it a 3 out of 5.
Okay.
Maybe. Yeah, I think it's 3 out of 5.
I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So a little bit about the book. We follow our main character Seth after he drowns and dies, and he drowns and dies in Washington in the United States, and then he wakes up in either a seemingly real or not real London or England, I believe, which was his childhood home. And then the story takes off from there. So why did you give it a 3 out of 5?
Oh, I guess the things that I liked about it were somewhat the character development. So I guess one thing about this is it's a young adult novel. And I think I haven't read young adult in a little while, so I liked the character development. I didn't love the main character. He definitely came off as very much of a teenager to me. I was kind of frustrated with him for most of the novel. I didn't really enjoy kind of reading about him from his point of view for a lot of it, because I'd be like, come on, just stop being annoying or get it together kind of thing, which isn't really fair of me to say because he's a teenager, but it's kind of how I felt.
I actually didn't love Seth either. What I really liked about the book is that it was fast-paced, and I feel like Patrick Ness did a really good job at like keeping you in this state of confusion. Like he literally ended every chapter with like a cliffhanger, so that you're kind of like, you want to read more, you want to know what happens next. So it's very quick, even though it was over 500 pages, I think. I wanted to keep reading it. However, I don't think it needed to be that long. I think it would have been fine being a 200 or 300 page book. It was way too long. You're right, I didn't like the main character, but I did like the LGBTQ plus representation, and I thought that the concept was really unique. It just wasn't fleshed out very well.
And you would think in 500 pages,
yeah,
you would, well, I don't know. Yeah, I definitely agree that at first the cliffhangers thing, that like I noticed that like right, the first 2 chapters. And at first I was super annoyed because I'm like, why are you doing this? You don't need to, like, it felt like a gimmick to me that he was kind of rather than actually writing an interesting story, he would kind of like leave you hanging at the end of a chapter with something like, but then he found out, period, or ... and then leave it at that until you kind of flip to the next chapter. And at first I was like, what are you doing? Like, come on. But after a while, I actually really found myself kind of getting into it and being like, wow, but what happens next? And then flipping back to it, and then I'd be like taking a shower, like, but what happens to Seth after that?
Yeah.
So like, I finished it pretty quickly, just because I was like, well, that was a cool thing that happened. What happens next?
I think Patrick Ness does a really good job of keeping the reader engaged, but I wasn't overall satisfied with the book overall. Yeah, I think so too. The last book that we finished in the month of September is Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. So I gave it a 4 out of 5. What did you give it?
I think I also give it a 4 out of 5. It was like an 8.5 out of 10. Like, I feel like 4 out of 5 doesn't do it the justice that it deserves. It's slightly more than a 4 out of 5. It's about a guy named Gregor, who's a traveling salesperson. He's visiting his family, his childhood home, and staying with his family for a couple of days. He wakes up one morning and finds out that he's transformed into an insect. And from there, it kind of just unravels. It focuses a lot on how his family reacts to him and how he reacts to himself and, what he thinks of himself. And it kind of develops all the themes regarding that, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting too. This was one of the translated works that we read. It's translated from German, and it's a novella. It's a really short book. I actually think it's almost quite the perfect sized book. It was like a little bit over 100 pages, and I found that a lot of the writing was very intentional. I didn't feel like there was any like fluffy words put in there. What I really enjoyed about the book was, again, that it was a fast read. I think I read it in like an hour or 2. I enjoyed the story overall. It was a really sad story though. I really enjoyed Kafka's writing, and I enjoyed the plot overall.
I also enjoyed the plot. I feel like if you talk about the plot and you tell someone like that's what the book's about, it seems like what's so interesting about a story about that? Some guy wakes up as a bug, lives his life as a bug. Like, okay, cool. But the way Kafka writes it, like, you're right, he wastes no time like mincing words. He doesn't mess around. And I think the other good thing about that is, rather than like, I guess what I don't like about some authors is, or like the way some things are written, like allegories especially, is they'll shove like the meaning in your face. Like they'll, keep on hammering home like, this is what I'm trying to tell you about it. And that's, sometimes it works, but Kafka's so light-handed with that. All he does is tell you Gregor's thoughts and tells you like what, you know, his family's been doing and how things change over time. And I think because of that, people like there's so many different interpretations that can be taken from it, and it almost kind of doesn't reflect so much what Kafka's thinking with the book, with the writing, as it does
like your own thoughts.
Exactly,
Yeah.
like what you've gone through. And it's like it can be applied to so many different situations. Even though nobody in the world has woken up as a bug, it's like,
yeah,
it's very meaningful.
I also think that this read was similar to me, like The Vegetarian, in that, like what Ben said, I think depending on who the reader is, what their cultural background is, you know, what their experience in life has been, you'll take something different from it. It'll either be like a commentary on capitalism, commentary on how things don't go as expected and how maybe you don't have as much of control as your life as you may think of, or even, you know, commentary on social isolation and how like people who deviate from the social norm are often like outcast in society. So I think we both interpreted it differently, which I think that's what makes this novella very spectacular. The only reason I didn't give it a 5 out of 5 is I don't have a reason. It just felt like it was a 4 out of 5 to me.
I guess part of it was also it was kind of like a take it as you will kind of novel, and while that was good, you kind of almost like there were some things that I found inconsistent almost, like he didn't pay attention to his own writing. I feel like he so little focuses on the details that you start to notice that things are slipping between the cracks, and like a character will disappear mid-story, or like something that happened earlier on like changes and isn't there anymore or something like that.
Now that you mentioned it, I was really confused by one of, I believe she was a maid. She was there and then she wasn't, and I was like, is this the same character? I thought she left. I thought she was fired.
Yeah, like I think they say the cook leaves and then later the cook is back and the maid's gone or something like that. And
Yeah.
you're like, how did any of this make sense?
There are inconsistencies in the story if you pay really close attention. Like his eye for detail was not there. I think overall it was an allegorical tale and it succeeds at that, but it doesn't succeed at being a very tight, detailed, driven book. Yeah, well, that was all. Well, those were all the books that I read in the month of September. Those are 2 of the books that he read alongside with me. He reads other books that I don't read. But thanks for watching.
Like and subscribe.